According to media this morning, the Pentagon has recognized that it has low weapons stockpiles and some key missile components, and that they are doing everything they can to double the missile production for potential conflict with China. Not sure why we want to isolate out China for that and basically signal to everybody that we need to get ready for war with China. That's got its own problems, but it's also somewhat troubling that we're looking to expand our expand our capacity with these 12 critical weapon systems, which we'll get to in a minute. And as I've been talking to you many times, that should be something that's alarming long time ago. And I'm talking about during the Biden administration, that we're now into the 8th or 9th month of the current administration. And now you're talking about, hey, we need to start doing some of this stuff and expanding these things. A little bit late, but maybe better late than never. But then the problem, and you can see it in the subheader of that Wall Street Journal article that Gary's showing right there, military leaders are urging defense contractors to increase assembly of 12 critical urging. And if you read into the details of there, the Pentagon is recognizing that, yes, we're low on especially interceptor missiles. That's been one of the biggest shortfalls, which we keep reiterating here, how important and absolutely vital that is to any kind of potential war-making scenario for the United States. The side that has the most air defense weapons is certainly going to have the best chance to either endure an enemy onslaught or to win any kind of a conflict. And we've talked about how somewhere around 600 is our current capacity, which is not anywhere near enough even to defend ourselves, much less to continue to supply countries like Israel in the Middle East and Ukraine, which apparently we're continuing to do with the no end in sight for either one of those. Well, we don't even have enough for those two combined, much less for our own needs. And now then we're saying, well, let's double those. But then when you start getting into the details, you find out that all we're saying so far is that we want to urge the defense industrial base to make these the new capabilities, build new factories, get new weapons equipment supply, the supply chains where you have the raw materials that you need, all of those kinds of things, hire new people, build new factories. All those things are necessary. And you're sending signals that they should, which is a radically different thing than directing that they will, or that you have contracts. And even some of the executives who were speaking off the record said, oh, okay, great that you want us to do that. I mean, who wouldn't want to make some money? But you're asking us to take a lot of risk by having a lot of capital investments and hope that there's going to be contracts that follow that, because they said so far there haven't been contracts. They said that'd be the best signal for it. And so what you're going to get is you're going to get maybe a tepid response. I think the article also mentioned that some of the defense contractors have taken the risk, and they said, all right, they're going to expand maybe $1 billion. One particular company said they have expanded, rather, or in the process, rather, of expanding a 3,500 square foot facility, which may sound big in raw numbers, but it doesn't really equate to that much more capacity. And of course, you need so many other things. You've got to have personnel, you have to have equipment, you have to have the ability to make these components, et cetera. And a lot of these are really high-end things. It's very, very difficult to do. And you need a lot more than just we should or we urge you to, if you really want anything to happen. Otherwise, the most you're going to get is an incremental expansion. And that is, really important. If you think that you're going to end up in a conflict with China, which I'm 100% against, think that it is, if not suicidal, incredibly foolish, not anything that's going to help us. There's no war that we need to go into China and fight with them, especially over the issue of Taiwan, which is what everybody's focused on. That's a bad idea, something we shouldn't go down. But if you think that is what you're going to do, and then you keep taking policies that continue to move in that direction, you have an increase in the defense budget itself, at least up to $1 trillion in the next budget, probably more than that. I mean, it's been continuing to go up. I don't see any evidence it's going to go down. If you think there's any possibility that the war in the Middle East will continue on, if you think there's any possibility that the war against Russia will continue on, or that, God forbid, we should ever have to fight as an Article 5 issue with NATO against Russia, then you should be taking some actions here and not just giving signals. Because listen, and I've told you so many times, The Russians did that. They entered the war in 2022 not prepared. And I'm talking about the state wasn't prepared. They thought that they were going to go in with a big show of force. It was going to compel everybody to give up. That's not the case. It's not what happened. And they got caught with their pants down. It took them the better part of a year and a half of incredibly high demands from the government and completely retooling a good portion of their industrial base to wartime material. And it took a long time of really focused effort because, again, this is an existential issue for the Russians. And so that's what it takes. If you think this is an existential thing and you're putting everything you have into it and you had a decent industrial base, then it took upwards of a year and a half to get really started. And only now at the 3.5-year mark is Russia really ramped up to where it can now actually sustain a war of attrition against the West, not against NATO, Ukraine. They've had that for a while. But see, they're always concerned that they may have to end up fighting a conventional war against NATO. So even according to what the Ukrainian intelligence services have admitted, even U.S. sources have admitted that Russia's production rates are way more than what they need to fight and what they're using on say, a monthly basis on the front lines in any of these key categories. So that tells you that a good percentage of that, and it's probably a state secret in Russia what that actually is going into storage to build up stockpiles. So they have the capacity and are building it more to overwhelm what we have. We've told you, again, NATO itself has admitted less than a year ago that we have probably 5% of the capacity that we would need to defend our own airspace in the event of a conflict with Russia. And you see, we've done only marginal things, nibbled around the edges of expanding our capacity in those areas. Now, I'm all for not doing anything to go to war. I'm all for let's don't plan to have a war with Russia because that's all too often a self-fulfilling prophecy. But what I am saying is don't do stupid things that could potentially spawn a war when you're not ready and you don't have the capacity. And if you stumbled into a war, you're going to be caught with your pants down in a much bigger way than Russia, because unlike how Russia was caught with its pants down, the Ukraine and the Western side still had relatively limited capacity to surge into. They had some, but not comparatively how much Russia now has after more than 3.5 years and 2 full years now of really ramping up that industrial base from the time they started at production value. That's not good for our side. And lest you think that that's not a real concern, let's start taking a look at what is going on right now. And unfortunately, in both Ukraine, Europe, and the United States, we have more and more people that are disconnected from reality. Now, there has been a lot of statements here of late in the last week or so where the United States said, hey, it's okay. Trump specifically said it's okay to use shoot down Russian MiGs if they get into your airspace. Just shoot them down, no problem. A lot of things have been allegedly drones from Russia have been appearing all over the West. I think there was some more just this past weekend. And then you see here in what Gary's showing you right here, this is the latest drone attack. You see 600 drones and missiles overnight in Ukraine from Russia. And this is becoming more and more common, 600, 800, 700 in a single night. And Ukraine claims that they're shooting most of the stuff down. But I mean, your own eyes can see the images right there that a significant portion of these things are getting through. There's another one right there. And so the interceptor missiles and the air defense capacity writ large is really important to have if you don't want to end up like Ukraine, and you don't want these kind of images coming from Western cities. So if you're not prepared for that, then why go down the path that you want to potentially stumble into a war here? Everything that we should be doing is getting this war off the table so that we stop this kind of stuff and lower the chances of stumbling into a war between Russia and the West. But we don't. Now, as I mentioned here, a lot of people have been commenting in the West, not just President Trump, that we should be more aggressive against Russia in the air. If their aircraft stray into anywhere in Western Europe, They should be shot down. More and more people are talking about that. Well, over the past weekend, there was apparently a meeting between Putin and Lukashenko in Belarus. And after the meeting, Lukashenko came out and said, there's a deal on the table that can end this, but here's what he had to say.
There's a good proposal on the table. President Putin and I discussed it. I won't talk about it. The president will say that himself. A good proposal. The proposal for Ukraine, which, among other things, was heard by Donald Trump in Alaska, was taken to Washington for consideration and discussion. A very good proposal. If the Ukrainians don't accept these proposals, it will be like at the beginning of the Cold War. It will be even worse. They will lose Ukraine.
That written translation, or the part of that translation, actually was not the right word. It says that, like during the Cold War. The actual translation was during the special military operation, except it's going to be worse. He's saying that there won't be any Ukraine left. So now, good is in the eye of the beholder. Certainly from the Russian and Belarusian side, a good deal equals ending the war on the current terms that the Russians want. Obviously, the Ukraine and the European side aren't going to be using that same terminology, but it is realistic because of the balance of power. I say it so many times, I don't need to repeat it again here. You're well aware of how irrevocable and huge and building the Russian advantages is militarily and every capacity over the Ukraine side, and we keep seeing that. Gary just showed you the video of last night, just hours ago. In some of those cases, those things were falling down. We see on the front line, Ukraine tries to make some local counterattacks here and there, but they lose a lot of people in the process. Russia ends up taking it back. And then elsewhere on the line, wherever they move people to try and block one part of Russia, they end up losing in another. Everywhere you look, Ukraine is physically losing this war on the ground and in the air. So why should then we not do what's rational and say, hey, all right, let's just end this on the best terms we can get it now, because otherwise Russia probably is going to make that good. I mean, what Lukashenko didn't say that out of nowhere. You can be sure that that was coordinated with Russia and that they're giving an explicit warning. Either have a negotiated settlement or we may take all of Ukraine, not just these 4 oblasts. And you saw Vladimir Putin. We showed you that back in Beijing a few weeks back, where he said, we'll either end this in negotiations or we'll end it on the battlefield. Well, now then they're going a little bit further than that and saying what it equals to win on the battlefield, meaning we're not just going to stop at these oblasts. We could take all of it. If you don't take the deal, we will keep fighting until we have what we consider on our own terms of what we need for the end of this. Now, I think part of the problem in the West is we just don't believe it. We just don't think they actually have that capacity, even though there's no reason not to think that they do. And in fact, one of the people who doesn't agree with that is Volodymyr Zelensky, who, in fact, specifically was asked, I think it was this morning, about what Lukashenko said this weekend.
It's difficult for me to react to what's being said by Lukashenko. Honestly, he lives in his world. He built it this way, isolated himself. He's been living for 3 decades in this house, the house that he built, but this is the house of the size of the country. But I'd want him to remember that his country is independent. He lives in his world, but sometimes Putin pays a visit to this world and they chat about something. 2 quite old men, so it's difficult to comment. Let him talk.
So, yeah, just a couple of just old farts just sitting out there talking a bunch of crap. And, okay, I mean, you can, it plays well in Western media that he looks like, you know, very confident in that speech and just mocking Putin and Lukashenko. It's not wise to say, I'm going to mock the guy with the largest nuclear weapon stockpile on the planet. And at any time, see, that's one of the things you really need to understand. Russia cannot lose this war. There is this much chance, literally, not point anything. There is zero, none whatsoever chance that Ukraine will ever compel Russia to meet its own terms, because if things start going bad, they have the nuclear trump card. And it's foolish to the highest degree to think, oh, well, they'll just never use that. Why do you think they have nuclear weapons, if not to forestall a defeat on a conventional battlefield? The Russians would use it if it came to that. We already know from 2 separate public sources that the first year of this war, Russia gave serious consideration when they lost some territory in the Kherson and in the Kharkiv areas in the north and in the west of that conflict. So I don't know upon what basis you think they wouldn't do it later on, if in this mythical possibility you should actually start to drive them out. And of course, that's in line with what President Trump said a week or so ago with the Truth Social, claiming that Ukraine could now go back to its 1991 borders. I'm going to get to that in a minute because we have a little bit more information about why Trump may have been so confident to say that in Truth Social. Maybe it was more than just hyperbole. He may actually think that they can, which itself is a big problem here. But let's continue on with President Zelensky, because he says, listen, we'll at least contemplate having negotiated starting at the line of contact, but with a pretty big caveat.
Our borders are defined in our constitution. Everybody knows Ukrainian borders that were recognized by all countries in the world and by international law. As regards the contact line or the front line, where the hostilities are taking place, we can move to diplomatic track from this line. This is the line where the leaders can agree on ceasefire and the teams could start their work on the plan to end the war. This is what is possible, but Russia will not be drawing new borders in Ukraine.
Okay, so that was at the Warsaw Security Conference earlier today. And you heard the reaction there. He was on a video teleconference in Warsaw. There was a big audience in there of Western security analysts and leaders and other folks like that. And of course, they loved it. And again, Zelensky's really good at playing to the crowd. He reads the room well, and they love it, and they have response there. But is that realistic? So, in essence, what you have Zelensky saying is that repeating something he said, at least in some degrees, over the last several months, is that the current line of contact is where we'll have a conversation, meaning that no way we're going to get rid or going to withdraw from the rest of the Donbass or any of the other 4 territories. We're just not going to do it. We'll stop at that line, and that will start the conversation. And in his mind, that means work back toward the east, not toward the west. So that is categorically against what the Russians will even contemplate. They see the minimum that they'll talk about is the administrative borders of all 4 of the oblasts, meaning you have to withdraw from all of that territory. So it doesn't matter if he says he's willing to have a negotiated settlement here, because Russia has categorically rejected that possibility. I think, by the way, you're seeing on your screen here, this is, I think this is a live shot of Benjamin Netanyahu arriving at the White House. He's just meeting Trump right there, and we're going to have some conversations. And by the way, we're going to have a show on this at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Let me see if they say anything. Let's just watch for a second. Okay, we seem to have frozen up. Well, I guess he's not going to make any statements at all. And you're asking about the 21-point potential peace plan, which I'll be covering later this afternoon at 3 p.m. So we'll get back to that then. But that just kind of gives you a little taste of what's to come here. But let's get back to where we were here, because Zelensky now is basically saying, now I'm willing to have a negotiated settlement, but he knows it's not true, because he knows he's asking for things that the Russians categorically won't agree to. And again, these things and all negotiations of war and peace and trying to bring things to an end, especially when you're in a conflict, it always matters what you can do and what you can't do, and what the other side can do and what you can't stop. That's what it always comes down to. Everyone will try to push their agenda. They'll try to push their points. But if there's no leverage that you have to compel compliance on the other side, then it's fruitless and foolish to keep going down that path. And that's where we are, because Russia isn't going to give in on any of those things, because they don't have to. Everything the West can do is it can make life more difficult for Russia, but it can't compel them to do it. Whether you're talking about economics, whether you're talking about battlefield strikes, whether some of these strikes that are deeper into Russia, they hurt, they don't like them. It's not going to change their performance and behavior at the front line anymore. In fact, even less than it does when the Russians fire this like 600 missile barrage and strike all kinds of targets, even in the capital city, in other command and control facilities, and other cities throughout the country. You see they're striking, they're getting through every day. We just showed you those polls. And yet you see Ukraine's not submitting. Now, upon what rationale can anyone suggest that the much, much geographically larger and more dispersed Russia, which has a lot more air defense capabilities and a lot more of these facilities that are spread out and deep, many of them beyond the range of anything that Ukraine can even reach, and as opposed to the much smaller and contained area of Ukraine, which Russia is hitting with near impunity on a nearly daily basis. And it's not knocking them out. So why do you think it's going to do it here? It's just this irrational hope. Well, I'd like it to be that way, so we're going to keep basing on that. Not a good thing to base your literal survival on. But they're also not the only one, because you have more and more people in Europe seeming to be moving more in the orbit of where Zelensky is. Now, Zelensky's been saying from the very beginning of this war, I'm fighting for you. This is for Europe, not just for us. We're like the front lines for you, so you're helping us help you, all this kind of stuff. And it's always been nonsense. And usually I just rolled my eyes at it. But here in the last few months or so, it seems like more and more people in Europe are really starting to come around to say, no, really, I think maybe he's right. And in fact, we have, let's see, I don't guess I have that one here, but you've had Germany and France and Donald Tusk. Gary, I don't remember we talked about this. Do you have the one with Donald Tusk? Is that handy from Poland overnight?
I want to say this very clearly, and I would like my compatriots in Poland to hear these words. This war is also our war. We hear it often, both here in Warsaw and everywhere else on Earth. We often hear people saying, no, this isn't our war, it shouldn't concern us. Let them kill themselves there or solve their own problems. It doesn't concern us. We don't want to pay, we don't want to sacrifice our money, our time, and especially the lives of our soldiers. But we have to be aware, and it's not about whether someone loves Ukraine, or whether someone has good or bad experiences with Ukraine. This isn't a question of simple, obvious and necessary solidarity with a country that was attacked by an aggressor. It's a question about the security and survival of the entire Western civilization.
Well, okay, I get it why Zelensky would say that, because he's doing everything he can, is desperate to draw you in on his side. I get that. But it's interesting and weird that he's in the middle of that comment right there, literally mocking the concept, which should be an article of faith. Like, well, we don't want to get our soldiers killed, we don't want to have our countries being blown up, etc. Good, but then why are you literally mocking that idea? That, I mean, do you want your soldiers to die, etc.? I mean, and then he just tags it out. It's the Western civilization. I mean, what the hell are you talking about? Where is the real threat from Russia to do that? I mean, you on other times will literally mock the Russian military and say, look, they've been trying for, what is it? I guess in really focused terms, for most of this year to take Pokrovsk, that one reasonably sized city in the east, kind of the central hinge on the entire Russian offensive. And they have made some success in it. And they've made some progress. They're even in the since our last video that we made here, they've made more progress. They're moving more into the internal part of the city. The same is true in Kupiansk in the north. They're moving further into that city, but it's still, they haven't gotten them. And now you want to say that Western civilization is at risk from a country that has successfully taken about 1% in the last, I think it's like 18 months inside Ukraine, where there's only one army fighting? I mean, there's no rational logic to that. And so you literally keep bumping up the possibility of having a conflict with Russia, and forget about whether Russia would be able to defeat you. But if you get into a war with them, it could all too easily go nuclear. And even if it only stayed conventional, why invite your soldiers to die and missiles now to be flying? Those videos that Gary was showing you a minute ago from overnight, all these things burning in Kiev. You want Warsaw to be that way? You want your cities to be the same things? You want that to be burning? You want these to be images that are coming from your country for nothing. Why would you even toy with that? And it's not just Poland, because also Germany, France, UK have said similar things this summer. With the I think it was the French version of their chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, yeah, they could be coming for us. Germany's saying, yeah, we're going to move some of our troops even into the Baltic areas there because they could be coming for us next. We could be at war with them coming up shortly. You have Mark Rutte saying we could be at war with Russia within 3 to 5 to 7 years. We have to be building up and all this kind of stuff. Why would you be talking such violent rhetoric that can only have one effect on the other side to make them feel you're coming after them and that you're preparing, literally, physically preparing for war with Russia? And weirdly enough, I didn't have it cut time, but Dmitry Medvedev, who's usually a firebrand on the Russian side, actually had something posted today where he said, listen, we need to be careful with this talk here, because he goes, first of all, I don't know why people keep saying that we're going to attack somewhere. We don't have any interest in attacking. Why would we want to go into what he called decrepit Europe? We've got everything we need in our country here. We don't want to send our army to take over Europe. And why would we even want to? What's the value of doing that? So they have the stated claim that they don't want to. They don't have the military capacity to do so. And they have the demonstration that almost the best they can do in 3.5 years of war is a pretty small amount on the eastern side of Ukraine. So why would we want to go down that path? Now, he also continued to say, I don't think that the Europeans are going to do this either. And he listed several reasons why he thought, which are pretty logical. One would hope that he's right. How weird that we're saying that about Dmitry Medvedev, that we in the West hope he's right, that the Europeans actually aren't going to do this. But then he ends it with a pretty sobering and also problematic statement that, however, you could still get a mistake. You could still get an error, an accident, something that could spawn a war that could then go nuclear. Weapons of mass destruction was the phrase that he used. Why do we want to even entertain that possibility? There's nothing to gain here, folks. There's nothing for the West to gain. There's nothing for the West to fear. We don't have to fear that Russia is going to roll across Western Europe. They have demonstrated that the way modern warfare is fought, if you're paying any attention at all, you can make it so costly for the invading side that they're not going to want to do it. And as the Ukraine side is, and the reason why Russia is still willing to pay that price is because it's an existential threat on their border, which is an active hostility and has been for quite a long time from the West. And I'm talking back to 2014. But that doesn't exist outside of Ukraine, and there's no reason for Russia to do that. And they've not stated anything to that regard as well. So let's stop being dumb and stupid. And now, fortunately, everybody in Europe is not this way. We've mentioned many times Slovakian leader Robert Fico and also Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who this weekend got together, actually, and they were reminiscing about how they were sucked into World Wars I and II against their wishes, and they didn't want to get that. And they said, that's not going to happen again. Here's how Viktor Orban put it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we did not want either of these wars. Neither the Hungarians nor the Slovaks wanted to participate in either of the world wars. Yet, we were sent to the front, and our lives were turned upside down for imperial interests. With the rebuilding of the bridge, both nations expressed simultaneously that they do not want any more bridge-destroying wars in Europe. When I was here for the first time, the Commissioner for the Expansion of the European Union, Verheugen, was also here, and the three of us expressed that we wanted to join a Europe that is a guarantor of peace. I suggest that we savour the words as it would be about a Europe. However, the world has changed a lot since then. Just like the old empires that oppressed us, now the European Union is also a warlike project.
It's so embarrassing that you have both Slovakia and Hungary talking about the warmongers not being Russia, but being the European Union. The European Union is supposed to be an economic grouping that benefits all of the people inside. They have common financial processes, etc. But it's turned into almost more warlike and war hawkish than NATO itself. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen and Kaya Kallas, the chief diplomat, I mean, you would think that they were leading a war-fighting organization instead of an economic formation. That's almost all they talk about, or that's the primary thing. They keep going back to that instead of talking about economic things and it just being common sense about what can bring security and peace by ending the war. But instead, they just seem hell-bent on keeping the risk up. Now, whether they mean it or not, that's another question that we can answer. But their actions keep it alive and keep pushing right on the edge of whether they're going to go into by talking, boisterous things about how they're going to shoot down Russian MiGs, et cetera. And of course, over the weekend, the Russians said, wouldn't recommend it. And if you do, there will be an immediate response. Don't find out. See, this is the thing. You're toying with something that could all too easily expand out that nobody actually wants or that nobody should want. Certainly the Russians don't want. We shouldn't want it. And that's what should motivate us, is to do what makes some sense. Now, if it was only the Europeans and the European unions and the Kaya Kallases and the Mark Rutte's, et cetera, that would be one thing. Unfortunately, whatever Trump says, some of his most senior advisors and people who are in his inner circle are saying some of the same things and making the same dumb comments that people in Europe are. So unfortunately, I can't just blame Europe. We have to look on our own side here. Let's look, first of all, at what former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said this weekend.
President Trump has given Vladimir Putin every chance to settle this out, to find a peaceful solution, and Vladimir Putin has rejected every one of those efforts. You saw a really diligent try in Anchorage in Alaska to get a good outcome for the world, and Putin just thumbed his nose. And so what I think you're seeing is President Trump saying, fine, we can do this a different way. No one should forget, and it's not a perfect parallel. He gave the Iranians a similar warning, and then we had 12 days of hell rain down on them. I think Vladimir Putin will have to come see that expanding this war will be proved to be a mistake, that the Europeans will do their part and the United States will do its, and that in the end, Putin has got to decide that the costs exceed the benefits, and I think President Trump is prepared to make that so.
Russia needs to wake up. I mean, he's talking like the United States is a parent and Russia is a wayward child, and they're not. In fact, if anything, probably the power imbalance now is on Russia's favor militarily over us. And he doesn't seem to recognize that. And it's more than just a little disturbing that you want to say it's not a perfect parallel with Iran. You shouldn't even be having it in the same conversation. Iran is not Russia. Russia is not as limited as Iran. Russia has the largest nuclear stockpiles in the world. They have a very large and effective air force. They have a navy. And even though the Black Sea Fleet has been hit with a lot, don't compare the rest of the Russian Navy to that port right there, because there's some significant local issues that are involved there. And most of the experts that I've talked to, the naval experts, have said it's a mistake to say that Russia has no navy. They're not capable. They do have one, and they are capable. All of these things Iran doesn't even have. But when you're trying to make the illusion that just like Trump was playing hardball with Iran, and when they didn't play with him, when they didn't follow his instructions, then they saw they had a 12-day war and got put back in their place. And then he says, Trump, at the end of that, he says Trump can use some other stronger methods to Russia too. What do you mean then? If you don't mean that the United States might use force on Russia, what do you mean? And why would you want to bring up that example unless that's exactly what you meant? And I don't know. Maybe Mike Pompeo is so foolish that he actually thinks that saying tough words like that and making the connection between what Trump said and what, by the way, not what Trump did, but what Israel did. I think they were using him for that, but we'll talk about that this afternoon. But if you think that that's going to scare Russia, that's going to make Russia go, oh, darn, look what they've done in the past. Well, we can't follow that. I mean, you're dangerously misinformed. And the problem is, I mean, he keeps saying this, Pompeo, on Fox News. We know for sure, obviously, Trump watches Fox News on a daily basis, but also Mike Pompeo probably has direct access should he want to do so. How much he does is unknown right now. He's not exactly a close confidant, but he's still in the mix, obviously. The fact that they keep putting him on there here. Of even more concern is the vice president. J.D. Vance, who also says that, you know what, Russia just has to wake up.
Unfortunately, what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, the Russians have refused to sit down with any bilateral meetings with the Ukrainians. They've refused to sit down with any trilateral meetings where the president or some other member of the administration could sit down with the Russians. But the Russians have got to wake up and accept reality here. A lot of people are dying. They don't have a lot to show for it. How many more people are they willing to lose? How many more people are they willing to kill? Our attitude here is we're going to keep on working for peace, and we hope the Russians actually wake up to the reality on the ground.
Yeah, you hope that they wake up to your reality on the ground. But when you use that rhetorical statement, how many more people are they willing to lose? How many? As many as it takes. I mean, they are very clear on that they have changed their tactics in the last few months, especially, and they've been doing it really this whole year, but even more so in the last couple of months, to minimize friendly casualties and maximize their enemy casualties in Ukraine. So they're ramping up their firepower and everything from glide bombs to artillery to all different categories of the first-person view, the tactical drones, the strategic drones and operational that are flying across the country, the missiles that are going in there, and then the direct fire even at the front. And they're showing they will continue to do that because for Russia, it's an existential issue. For us, it's whatever, 10,000 miles away. So it's not the same for us, even for most of Europe, other than like Slovakia and Hungary, who are right there on the front lines, and they very much don't want this to go on. That should be also a marker here that the people who were closest up there, other than Poland, who has historic hatred for Russia, in some cases justifiably so, but they're kind of an outlier, but even they're not willing to, other than rhetorically, use a lot of military forces because they know they're going to be the first ones in the line of fire. And they don't, I don't think anyway, that they actually want a conflict. But we've got to, he said that the vice president there, they need to wake up. We need to wake up. And again, this term of wake up to reality, whose reality are you talking about? Because it doesn't appear to be the objective reality. It appears to be the preference we want. So that's why I say it's one thing for former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, but now here's the Vice President of the United States kind of echoing what he had said there. And if there's any other possibility, I mentioned at the top of this that True Social that President Trump put out a week ago saying that, well, Ukraine, it's now possible for them to go back to their 1991 borders. So we talked about what a lot of that might have meant at the past. Maybe that was just a rhetorical way for Trump to walk away. But we also have to recognize and consider the possibility that maybe he actually thinks that's true. And we have his hand-picked emissary, General Keith Kellogg, who also this weekend continued to reinforce the idea that Russia is losing.
I think what's happened is the constant information he gets, which is really good, from the intelligence agencies, from Secretary of State, all the way down the line, kind of shows him that Russia is not winning this war. If they were winning this war, they'd be in Kyiv, they'd be in Odessa, they'd be over the Dnieper River. That we added 2 new NATO allies. One of them, Finland had doubled the size of the border. The Russians have to protect. We added Sweden. This is where I think they have an opportunity to challenge Russia much more aggressively if they pick to do it and they get the weapon systems to do so.
Challenge Russia much more aggressively and get the weapons to do so. So he's talking about expanding the war. Now, the other side had been accused, the Western side had been accused in Russia of expanding the war. In fact, even I believe it was Vice President Vance had said, that if they want to expand, we want to keep them from expanding. The Russians not trying to expand it. They're trying to end it. But now we're talking about expanding it. And you just have to ask the question, where is this going? Well, since we know, and this circles all the way back to the beginning of this episode, we know that our defense industrial base is insufficient for what's going on right now. We know for sure that our stockpiles are way below what they should be, definitely what they were when this war opened. And because of how many weapons we've used in the Middle East, and now there's another $6 billion package on the table for Israel that we may want to. And of course, they're using a lot of these same packages. You had 2 new packages, $500 million each. in the last week or so from the United States to Ukraine that specifically includes interceptor missiles and long-range fires. So how do you keep doing that when you know that it would take, even by according to that Wall Street Journal piece here, you're talking 2026, 2027 before you can start to see any results? If they started today, if they got funding, if they started having contracts and whatnot, you're talking a couple of years away before you could start to really see any increase in that. But you're talking right now, like, let's have a conflict potentially now for the Ukraine side to go now, meaning the only way that they're going to be able to expand that is General Kellogg said there, if they get the weapons, well, they sure aren't going to be able to make them, not in that kind of category. They're only going to get them from one place, and that's primarily from the United States. I don't care who pays for them at this point. I care about having the capacity, and we'll see how many the Europeans come up with on their own. But you're talking about expanding the war. And there should be, any rational thinking person should understand from history that when you try to compel and coerce Russia, that the likelihood, the strong likelihood is that you're going to get them to double down on him, pay whatever price, make whatever sacrifices necessary to win. And they have done it over the centuries. Now, I've heard some commentary just over this weekend from the Western leaders who are trying to claim the other, because they say, well, they go back to the, I guess the 1904 and the 1917 revolutions that took place in Russia specifically. And they say, yeah, because it was hardship, they'd lost a lot of people, and maybe that'll happen again. And certainly that did happen in 1917. But you got to look at the context. That was in the middle of a world war that they were losing and had lost 5 million people because of incompetence at the national level. They had been doing terrible on the battlefield, and they had a lot of things that historically had been piled up on top of that. The Tsar was at an incredibly low approval rating. I don't think they actually had approval ratings at that time, but he was incredibly unpopular. And now that you don't have anything similar to that at all, the conditions are radically different than that. And Putin does have somewhere between around an 80% approval rating. I think it's rarely dipped even below that. And now it's hovering between 80, 84, depending on what month they're looking at here. So he's not unpopular. There aren't 5 million casualties on the Russian side. And they do view this as an existential threat. They view this as it's the West writ large against Russia, just using the cudgel of Ukraine. And they're not going to stop fighting because they feel like their future's at risk. They're not blaming Putin. They're blaming the West. So to base your hope that increasing the firepower from Ukraine into it, and by the way, they're also considering using, and now they're actually asking, the Ukraine side is asking the United States for cruise missiles, Tomahawk missiles from the United States. And apparently we are considering giving those too. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Why you still want to expand the capability and try adding one more thing. Remember, it was going to be the ATACMS. That was going to be the deal. We get those long-range fires. That was going to make a difference. Do you ever hear about ATACMS anymore? These long-range fires, they didn't do hardly anything at the time. And then it was going to be, it was F-16s. That was the real one. So we gave them F-16s, and you didn't hear anything after that except for when the F-16s get shot down or when they crash or something. So it didn't make any difference. And they're still trying to, we want more. And there's some other people have volunteered. Some other NATO countries have said, we'll give you a squadron of them. But they don't have the manpower to use them. And they have the same problems that their own fleets have, is that they can still be shot down and they're not some magic wonder weapons. And now you think the cruise missile, well, listen, this has additional problems because it is a missile that has nuclear capability. And do you really want to give a Tomahawk cruise missile to Ukraine and just hope that Russia doesn't think, what if this is a nuclear tipped one? Well, let's just let it land and then find out. I mean, you put Russia in the position to where they may calculate, we can't risk it. We have to return fire with nuclear weapons now while we can. It's just absurd to play with that kind of fire. And again, I have to tell you this. There is no upside for us. There is no potential value in any of this, because there is no rational, logical line to draw that says the acceleration of firepower and the expansion of the capabilities is going to cause Russia to do something against their national interest. It's irrational to think that way. And yet that's the way we're all thinking. So all I can hope is that all these advisors are wrong and that President Trump will, when push comes to shove, not shove back in a way that's going to get this war expanded, because it does look like that the Russians are, who clearly, and even through Dmitry Medvedev, don't want a war with the West and are doing whatever they can to end it, but they will not compromise on their border with Ukraine and having a hostile military alliance on it. They won't compromise with that, but they don't want to expand it elsewhere. Let's just put that to the test. Let's put that to the test and don't trust anything from the Russian side. And you want to make your own eastern flank much stronger. If you want to do these contracts and have these more missiles, it would take so many years just to bring us back up to where we were. 5 to 8 years, depending on who you want to talk to, just to return to where we were in 2022, and much less to have enough to actually sustain a war of attrition against Russia. So it seems irrational or illogical to consider that if we did that's going to enable us to have a war with Russia in 3 to 5 years, like Mark Rutte wants to say. But let's just hope that he's just using that fear-mongering just to get more weapons contracts or whatever for his side. I don't like it. I don't think it's a good idea. But right now, I'd take that over anything else, because as soon as we get this war over with, then the quicker we'll be able to validate that Russia doesn't want to invade the rest of Europe and that they're not going to do that. And then we have a chance to actually get back into some sort of normalcy, and the risk of nuclear war goes way down. That's what we need to be doing. We'll see what's going to happen. We're going to continue to follow that. And as always, as events unfold, you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to bring those to you, because we are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth you need, which is what we're going to do this afternoon when Netanyahu and Trump have some conversations and make some statements about what is being said. There's a lot of complicated and contradictory statements coming out of both Israel and the United States. We'll see where that ends up. Because Trump is apparently trying to talk Netanyahu into a 21-point peace process to end the war in Gaza. But Netanyahu, at least on American television yesterday, still keeps pushing back on that. Don't think he really wants a peace to end it in anything less than the expulsion of all the Palestinian people by whatever means. But we'll see. We'll see what happens when they actually talk and when they come out. Hopefully by that time, we'll have some public statements for you. But in any case, we'll analyze that for you then. Thank you very much, folks. We'll see you at 3 o'clock this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.